Have you ever wondered what caused the decades-long tension between two of the world's superpowers after the Second World War? Welcome to a captivating exploration of a period marked by intense rivalry, political maneuvering, and ideological clashes. Yes, we're talking about the Cold War, a silent battle that shaped the course of the second half of the 20th century. This was a time when the United States of America and the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics were locked in a tense standoff, their ideologies at loggerheads. The democratic capitalist West, led by the United States on one side, and the communist authoritarian East, led by the Soviet Union on the other, both vying for global influence and dominance. The Cold War was not just a war of weapons, but of ideas, of economic systems, and of moral principles. The stakes were high, the tension palpable, and the implications far-reaching. Join us today as we journey through this pivotal period in world history. The end of World War II was not the end of global tension. Quite the contrary, it marked the beginning of a new chapter of conflict and competition, this time between two superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union. In the immediate aftermath of the war, leaders from these nations, as well as the United Kingdom, convened at the Yalta Conference in February 1945. Here, they sought to decide the fate of post-war Europe. But despite their shared victory against the Axis powers, the seeds of future discord were already being sown. The Soviets insisted on a sphere of influence in Eastern Europe, while the Americans and British championed self-determination for all nations. Following the Yalta Conference, the Potsdam Conference in July 1945 further exposed these ideological differences. The division of Germany into four occupation zones controlled by the US, UK, France and the Soviet Union became a physical manifestation of these tensions, especially when the city of Berlin, deep in the Soviet zone, was similarly divided. But perhaps the most significant development of this period was the dawn of the atomic age. The United States detonation of atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945 not only ended the war in the Pacific, it also introduced a terrifying new element to global power dynamics. The Soviets responded by accelerating their own nuclear program, setting the stage for a nuclear arms race that would persist throughout the Cold War. In 1947, President Harry Truman issued a doctrine that would shape American foreign policy for the next 4 decades. The Truman Doctrine committed the United States to containing the spread of communism worldwide. This policy of containment, coupled with the division of Europe and the nuclear arms race, set the stage for a prolonged period of geopolitical hostility. Thus began a power struggle that would shape the world for the next 4 decades. The world watched with bated breath as two superpowers took center stage. It was the dawn of a new era, with the United States and the Soviet Union emerging as the dominant forces post-World War II. But it wasn't a peaceful era. Oh no, it was quite the opposite. This was the beginning of the Cold War, a period of intense geopolitical tension between these two superpowers that lasted from 1947 to 1953. The first significant event in this period was the Marshall Plan. Named after US Secretary of State George Marshall, this plan was America's ambitious endeavor to rebuild and stabilize Europe's economy, which was in shambles after the devastation of World War II. The US poured billions of dollars into Europe, hoping to prevent the spread of communism, a political ideology that was the lifeblood of the Soviet Union. However, the Soviets saw this as an act of American imperialism, leading to further tensions. This was starkly evident during the Berlin blockade in 1948, when the Soviets blocked all ground access to West Berlin, hoping to starve out the Allies and gain control over the city. But the Allies, led by the US, responded with the Berlin Airlift, a massive operation to supply West Berlin by air. In 1949, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO, was formed. This was a military alliance of Western European countries and the United States, created as a collective defense against the perceived threat of Soviet aggression. In response, the Soviet Union formed its own alliance, the Warsaw Pact, in 1955, further escalating the tensions. The world was now divided into two major blocs, with the US leading the capitalist West and the Soviet Union leading the communist East. The stage was set for a prolonged ideological and political struggle that would shape the rest of the 20th century. The Cold War had truly begun, and the world was watching. The Cold War was not just a political and military standoff, it was a race for global influence. During the height of the Cold War, from 1953 to 1962, this race took some dramatic turns. Let's begin with the Korean War, which actually started in 1950, but its reverberations were strongly felt in our timeline. The conflict was a proxy war with the Soviet-backed North Korea against the US-backed South Korea. It was a clear demonstration of the two superpowers' struggle for dominance without directly confronting each other. Then came the space race, a more peaceful but no less intense competition. It was a battle for technological supremacy, with both sides eager to prove their prowess. The Soviets took an early lead with the launch of Sputnik in 1957, but the Americans were not far behind. The U-2 incident of 1960 was another pivotal moment. An American U-2 spy plane was shot down over the Soviet Union, causing an international crisis. The incident exposed the covert operations both sides were conducting, escalating tensions further. Finally, we arrive at the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962, arguably the closest the world has ever come to nuclear war. The Soviet Union positioned nuclear missiles in Cuba, just 90 miles off the coast of Florida. This act was seen as an aggressive move by the US, leading to a 13-day standoff. The crisis was eventually resolved through diplomatic negotiations, but it marked a significant escalation in the Cold War. It's crucial to understand that these events were not isolated incidents, but part of a larger narrative. The superpowers were locked in a global chess game, each move calculated to gain an advantage over the other. They were engaged in a constant dance of power, each trying to outmaneuver the other without resorting to open warfare. Both sides were playing a dangerous game with the world hanging in the balance. Even the greatest tensions must eventually ease. And so it was with the Cold War. By the early 60s, the world was beginning to tire of living under the constant threat of nuclear annihilation. This weariness led to a period known as détente, a French term meaning relaxation of tension. The first significant step in this direction was the Strategic Arms Limitation Talks, or SALT I, in the early 70s. The United States and the Soviet Union, for the first time, agreed to put a cap on the number of nuclear weapons they would produce. This was followed by SALT II, which further limited the growth of their nuclear arsenals. For a moment, it seemed as if the world could breathe a sigh of relief. Then in 1975, the Helsinki Accords were signed. This agreement, signed by 35 countries including the US and the USSR, aimed at improving relations between the communist bloc and the West. It was a landmark in the ongoing process of détente, but the détente was not destined to last. The Soviet invasion of Afghanistan in 1979 reignited tensions, as it was seen by the West as an attempt to spread communism. However, the invasion turned into a quagmire for the Soviets, draining their resources and morale. Enter the Reagan-Gorbachev era. Ronald Reagan, the American president, and Mikhail Gorbachev, the Soviet leader, engaged in a series of intense negotiations. These talks eventually led to the signing of the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty in 1987, which eliminated an entire class of nuclear weapons. The climax came in 1989, with the fall of the Berlin Wall, a symbol of the division between East and West. This momentous event marked the beginning of the end for the Soviet Union, which officially dissolved in 1991. The Cold War was over, but its effects would continue to shape the world. The détente and the end of the Cold War were not just historical events. They were lessons in the power of diplomacy and negotiation, and a reminder that even the fiercest rivalries can be resolved through peaceful means. The end of the Cold War did not mean the end of its influence. This was a conflict that had a profound impact on the world, reshaping it in ways that are still felt to this day. In the immediate aftermath, the most significant change was perhaps the breakup of the Soviet Union. This once mighty superpower fragmented into 15 separate countries, marking a dramatic end to the bipolar world order that had characterized the Cold War era. This was a seismic shift, creating a new geopolitical landscape that we continue to navigate. The reunification of Germany was another significant event in the post-Cold War world. Split in two after World War II, with East Germany under Soviet control and West Germany aligning with the Western Bloc, the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989 symbolized the end of the Cold War tensions. The following year, Germany was officially reunified, setting a powerful precedent for the peaceful resolution of international conflicts. But the legacy of the Cold War extends beyond these geopolitical shifts. It continues to shape our world in profound and complex ways, influencing our international relations and politics. Countries once roped into the ideological tug-of-war between the East and the West still grapple with the impact of that alignment. The arms race has left us with a world bristling with nuclear weapons, and the spectre of that potential destruction still looms large. Moreover, the ideological divide that defined the Cold War hasn't completely faded. The tension between capitalist and socialist ideologies continues to cause friction in international relations. And while the Cold War may be over, the quest for global influence among nations remains a core aspect of international politics. So, while the Cold War may be a chapter in our history books, its influence is far from confined to the past. The echoes of the Cold War can still be heard today. The Cold War, a conflict that shaped a generation and changed the world. This intricate dance of power, stretching from the end of World War II to the early 90s, was a product of ideological differences, political tensions, and a mutual fear of nuclear annihilation. It was a war fought in the shadows, with chess-like strategies and proxy battles. We've delved into the rise, the climax, and the eventual thawing of this global standoff, reflecting on the key events and figures that played vital roles. We've seen how the Cold War's aftermath continues to shape our world, from the geopolitical landscape to the technological innovations that it spurred. In understanding the Cold War, we gain insight into the complexities of global politics, the immense power of ideologies, and the delicate balance of diplomacy. The echoes of this era remain relevant today, reminding us of the potential consequences of unchecked power and miscommunication. Understanding our past helps us navigate our present, and the Cold War is an integral part of that past.